Hey everyone. How are you doing tonight? I hope you're ready to take a little trip with me. We often have this very clean, very stately image of the past, don't we? All towering castles with pennants flying, and knights in shining, polished armor. But tonight I thought we could take a more grounded tour. A walking tour, to be precise, through a typical medieval city. We'll leave the high politics of the court behind and explore the world that most people actually lived in, right down at street level. And let me tell you, navigating those streets was a skill that probably made dealing with modern-day traffic feel like a walk in a very clean, very well-maintained park. If you enjoy these little strolls through history, maybe take a moment to like or subscribe. I always love seeing in the comments where you're all tuning in from. It makes our little historical explorations feel like a cozy, shared journey. Alright, let's get comfortable now. Dim the lights, settle into your clean, comfortable bed, and let's take our first tentative steps together into the past. Before one could even begin to consider the smells or the specific hazards of a medieval city, one had to understand the very ground beneath their feet. The streets of the 13th, 14th, or 15th centuries bore little resemblance to the paved, orderly thoroughfares we know today. The concept of a uniformly paved city, with dedicated sidewalks and underground sewer systems, was a distant dream of a Roman past or a far-off future. For the average medieval townsperson, the street was a living, changing, and profoundly messy entity. Most streets were not paved at all. They were simply packed earth, which, given the notoriously damp climate of much of Europe, meant they were often a sea of thick, clinging mud. This wasn't just clean soil and water, it was a rich, organic stew. Into this mud was churned a daily contribution of refuse from the households that lined the street. This included everything from vegetable peelings and discarded food scraps to animal bones and oyster shells. There was no municipal garbage collection service. People simply swept the waste from their homes and workshops directly into the street. It was the most convenient, and in many places, the only available method of disposal. The street was the communal dump. To manage the flow of rainwater and waste, most streets had a feature known as a kennel, in English, derived from the Old French word for channel. This was essentially an open, shallow gutter that typically ran down the center of the street. All the liquid waste, from rainwater to dishwater to other, less savory household effluents, was supposed to flow into this central channel, and ideally, make its way to a nearby river or ditch. In theory, this was a rudimentary form of drainage. In practice, these kennels were often clogged with solid waste, turning them into stagnant, stinking trenches of black sludge. The slope of the streets was often inconsistent, leading to large, foul-smelling puddles forming after any significant rainfall. This messy environment was further complicated by the ubiquitous presence of animals. Medieval cities were full of them. Pigs, which were prized for their ability to eat almost any kind of waste, were often allowed to roam freely, acting as a sort of slow-moving, four-legged sanitation squad. Their rooting and wallowing, however, did little to improve the overall condition of the streets. Chickens, geese, and dogs were also everywhere, adding their own droppings to the mix. The horses and oxen used for transport and haulage contributed a significant amount of manure daily. This animal waste, combined with the human refuse and the mud, created a unique and challenging terrain that every city dweller had to learn to navigate with skill and care. Some wealthier towns and major cities did have paved main streets, often with cobblestones, but these were the exception rather than the rule, and even these could be slick with a layer of filth. The street was not just a path from one place to another, it was a shared, multi-purpose space, a dynamic and often treacherous landscape. Now let us step directly into that landscape. Close your eyes and allow the sounds of your modern world to fade away. The hum of electricity, the distant whisper of traffic, let it all dissolve. In its place, feel a cool, damp air on your skin. You are standing at the entrance of a narrow, winding street in a bustling medieval town, perhaps in the year 1400. The first thing you notice is the ground itself. It is not flat or solid. You are standing on a surface of dark, compacted earth, and your shoes, hopefully thick-soled leather boots, sink slightly into the soft, damp ground. You take a tentative step forward, and you realize immediately that walking here requires your full attention. The street slopes gently from the houses on either side down towards the middle, where a shallow, dark channel of sludge moves sluggishly along. Your first instinct is to stay close to the buildings, on the higher, slightly drier ground. The houses themselves lean out over the street, their upper stories jutting out further than the ground floors, creating a tunnel-like effect that blocks out much of the direct sunlight, keeping the ground below in a state of perpetual dampness. You begin to walk, your eyes scanning the path ahead. You have to pick your way carefully around a pile of discarded cabbage leaves and mussel shells, evidence of last night's dinner from the house to your left. A few feet further on, a large puddle of murky, stagnant water blocks your path, forcing you to step precariously close to the edge of the central kennel. The stench from the channel is a constant presence, a sour, earthy, and complex aroma that rises to meet you with every step. You see a large sow, followed by a trail of piglets, trotting down the middle of the street, snuffling and rooting through the refuse in the kennel with audible grunts of satisfaction. A group of children, their feet bare despite the cold, dart past you, their laughter echoing off the timber-framed walls. They seem to navigate the treacherous terrain with an effortless, practiced grace that you lack. You press yourself against the wall of a building to let a man pass, leading a donkey laden with sacks of flour. The animal's hooves squelch loudly in the mud, splattering your leggings with a spray of brown muck. You look down at your boots and sigh. Staying clean here is not an option. The goal is simply to avoid falling. As you continue your slow, careful journey, you begin to understand the rhythm of the medieval street. It is a place of constant movement, of shared obstacles, of life lived out in the open. It is messy, it is challenging, but it is also undeniably, vibrantly alive. And this is only the very beginning of your walk. The treacherous, mucky ground of the medieval street was only one part of the challenge. A savvy walker knew that the dangers were not just underfoot, they could also come from above. The filth that clogged the central kennel and slicked the cobblestones didn't just magically appear. It was the result of a constant, downward flow of waste from the homes and workshops packed tightly along every lane and thoroughfare. In an age before internal plumbing and municipal sewer systems, the simple, biological necessity of dealing with human waste presented a daily logistical problem for every single resident, from the wealthiest merchant to the humblest artisan. For those living in grander stone castles or fortified manor houses, the solution was often the garderobe. The name itself is a small historical curiosity, likely derived from the French words for guarding robes, as it was common to hang clothes in these small closets. The theory, it seems, was that the potent ammonia fumes rising from the toilet shaft would help to kill fleas and moths in the garments. A garderobe was essentially a small room or stone-lined closet built into the thickness of the outer wall. Inside, a simple wooden or stone seat was positioned over a hole. This hole opened into a vertical shaft that dropped straight down the outside of the building. In a well-designed castle, these shafts would be positioned to empty directly into the surrounding moat or a nearby river, which handily washed the waste away. In less ideal situations, the shaft would simply end at the base of the wall, creating a foul-smelling pile that had to be periodically shoveled out by unfortunate servants known as gong farmers. For the vast majority of people living in a crowded medieval city, however, such architectural luxuries were unheard of. Their solution was far more immediate and portable: the chamber pot. This was a simple ceramic or metal pot, kept in the bedchamber or living area, which served as the household's indoor toilet. It was convenient, certainly, but it created an inevitable problem. Once used, it had to be emptied. And with no sewer connection to pour it into, the options were limited. The most common, and by far the easiest, solution was to simply open the nearest window and toss the contents out into the street below. This practice was so widespread that in some places, like Edinburgh, a customary warning cry would be shouted just before the pot was emptied. The cry of "Garde-la," a corruption of the French phrase "Garde-l'eau," meaning "watch out for the water," was supposed to give any unsuspecting pedestrians a moment to scurry for cover. This was, of course, a courtesy, not a guarantee. An inattentive walker, or one who was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, could receive a very unpleasant surprise. This daily cascade of water, which included not just human waste but also dirty dishwater, food scraps, and other liquid refuse, was a primary contributor to the sludge in the central kennel and the overall state of the streets. City authorities were aware of the problem. From time to time, they would issue regulations attempting to curb the practice. Some ordinances might mandate that chamber pots could only be emptied after dark, or that waste had to be carried down to the river. But these rules were incredibly difficult to enforce. For a family living on the third floor of a crowded tenement, the temptation to simply use the window instead of carrying a heavy, sloshing pot down multiple flights of stairs and through dark, unsafe streets was often too great to resist. The air itself was a potential hazard. You continue your careful walk, having navigated the main thoroughfare. You decide to turn into a much narrower side alley, a shortcut to the market square. The atmosphere here changes immediately. The sounds of the main street fade, replaced by a more intimate, enclosed quiet. The buildings on either side are tall, 3 or 4 stories high, and they lean towards each other, as if sharing secrets. The upper floors, a feature known as jetties, jut out progressively further, so that at the very top, the houses are nearly touching. This blocks out almost all the daylight, casting the lane below into a permanent, gloomy twilight. The air here is still and heavy, and the smells are more concentrated. You are acutely aware of the windows above you, dark squares in the timber and plaster walls. Every one of them is a potential source of danger. Your pace slows even further, and you find yourself walking in a slight crouch, your head tilted upwards, listening. You are no longer just watching your feet. You are actively scanning the air above. It's a strange, tense way to walk, a full-body experience of cautious navigation. The lane is so narrow that the central kennel is almost indistinguishable from the rest of the muddy ground. You hear a door open ahead of you, and a woman emerges, carrying a bucket. She walks to the edge of her doorstep and, with a flick of her wrist, tosses a wave of gray, greasy water into the middle of the alley before disappearing back inside. You freeze for a moment, glad you were not a few steps further ahead. You press on, your senses on high alert. Suddenly you hear it. It's not a loud noise, just a faint, distinct squeak of a wooden window shutter opening somewhere directly above you. You stop dead in your tracks. Your heart gives a little flutter. You hear a muffled voice, not a clear "Garde-la," but something like it, a quick, dismissive shout. Your eyes dart upwards, trying to pinpoint the source. Without thinking, you flatten yourself against the cold, damp plaster of the wall to your right, pulling your head in like a tortoise. A split second later, you hear a rushing sound, and a cascade of brownish liquid splashes down onto the muddy ground, exactly where you had been about to step. The splash is loud in the quiet alley. You watch as the new puddle steams slightly in the cool air, its foul, ammoniac odor hitting you with a sudden, sharp intensity. You remain pressed against the wall for a long moment. letting the reality of your near miss sink in. You look up and see the window shutter click shut. For the person up there, it was a thoughtless, everyday chore. For you, it was a moment of genuine peril. You take a deep breath, the foul air filling your lungs, and continue on your way, walking with even more caution than before, your respect for the vertical dangers of the medieval city now cemented in first-hand, if fortunate, experience. Having successfully navigated the treacherous alleyway and its potential aerial hazards, you emerge onto a slightly wider, more populated street. The journey so far has been a lesson in the immediate, tangible filth of the medieval city, the muck underfoot and the waste from above. But all of this refuse, the contents of the chamber pots, the sweepings from the workshops, and the sludge from the central kennels, had to have an ultimate destination. In a world without wastewater treatment plants or complex sanitation grids, gravity and convenience dictated the endpoint, the nearest body of water. The rivers and streams that flowed through these burgeoning cities, arteries that should have been sources of life and cleanliness, were instead treated as vast, moving sewers, the final resting place for the city's collective filth. The great rivers of Europe, like the Thames in London or the Seine in Paris, were the lifeblood of their respective cities in more ways than one. They were vital for transport, for trade, and for powering mills. But they were also the primary, and most accepted, method of waste disposal on a mass scale. The network of street kennels and open ditches was designed, in principle, to channel rainwater and waste towards the river. After a heavy rain, a great surge of water would flush through the streets, carrying with it the accumulated grime of weeks or months and depositing it directly into the river. But it wasn't just runoff. Industries were strategically located along the riverbanks precisely for easy disposal. Tanneries, notorious for their foul-smelling and toxic byproducts like animal fats, hair, and chemical agents, would simply release their effluent into the current. Butchers and fishmongers, concentrated in areas like London's East Cheap, found the river an indispensable convenience. The blood from the slaughterhouses, animal entrails, bones, and any unsold, rotting carcasses were unceremoniously dumped into the water. Records from the period are filled with complaints about the corruption of the water by the blood and filth from the butchers. Dyers, brewers, and other trades all added their own unique contributions to this toxic soup. And of course, the garderobes of the wealthy, whose houses and castles were often built directly on the riverbank, emptied straight into the water below. The river became a repository for everything the city no longer wanted. This presented a terrible paradox, because these same polluted rivers were also a primary source of water for the city's inhabitants. While the wealthy might have private wells or access to cleaner water brought into the city via conduits, most people relied on public wells or simply drew their water directly from the river. This water was used for washing, for cooking, and for brewing ale, which was often safer to drink than the water itself, thanks to the boiling involved in the brewing process. The wells themselves were scarcely safer. Dug deep into the ground, they were highly susceptible to contamination from the surrounding environment. In a city where the ground was saturated with waste and where graveyards and cesspits were scattered throughout the residential areas, it was almost inevitable that bacteria and filth would seep through the soil and into the groundwater, poisoning the wells. This made waterborne diseases like dysentery and typhoid a constant, deadly threat, though people at the time had no real understanding of the mechanism of transmission. They knew that sometimes the water made people sick, but they didn't connect it to the invisible world of microbes. They might blame it on the water's bad taste or smell, a sign of its corruption, but the true cause remained a mystery. The great bridges of this era, like the old London Bridge, were often more than just river crossings. They were bustling hubs of urban life, frequently lined with houses, shops, and even chapels, creating a permanent, lively communities suspended directly over the water they so heavily relied upon and so thoroughly polluted. You continue your walk, and the street begins to open up, leading you towards the river. The noise of the city grows louder here, a mixture of merchants hawking their wares, the hammering from a blacksmith's forge, and the rumble of cart wheels. You see the great stone arches of the city's main bridge ahead of you, a wide and busy thoroughfare. You join the throng of people moving across it. The bridge is a world unto itself. It is lined on both sides with tall, timber-framed houses and shops, their upper floors leaning out over the river below. The roadway is crowded with pedestrians, men on horseback, and vendors pushing handcarts. The air is filled with 100 different smells. The scent of baking bread from a shop, the sharp tang of leather goods, the sweet smell of fruit being sold from a stall. But underneath it all, rising up from below, is the unmistakable, pervasive smell of the river. You find a small opening between two shops, a space in the stone parapet that offers a clear view of the water. You lean against the thick, cool stone and look down. The river is not a sparkling, clear blue or green. It is a slow-moving, opaque brown, the color of milky tea. Its surface is not smooth but is coated with a greasy, iridescent sheen in places, catching the pale light of the sky. You watch as a slick of what looks like animal fat drifts slowly by, followed by a bobbing collection of cabbage leaves and other vegetable refuse. A dead dog, its body bloated, turns slowly in the current before getting caught up in the pilings of the bridge. You see a woman emerge onto a small wooden balcony built onto the back of one of the houses on the bridge. She empties a bucket over the side, and its contents splash into the water with a dull sound, creating a momentary flurry of lighter-colored liquid that is quickly swallowed by the murky brown. Further down, you see a pipe extending from the base of a large building on the riverbank, from which a steady stream of dark, discolored water is pouring into the river. The smell rising from the water is potent and complex, a mixture of damp, earthy rot, decay, and a faint, sharp chemical odor. Yet, life on and around the river continues with a sense of complete normalcy. You see a boatman maneuvering his small ferry, his oar dipping into the filthy water. Near the riverbank, a group of women are kneeling, washing clothes in the very same water, beating them against the stones. They are upstream from the dyer's outlet, at least, but the water is still visibly foul. Leaning there on the bridge, suspended between the bustling life of the city and the slow, polluted death of its river, you feel the central, jarring contradiction of the medieval world, its complete dependence on a natural world that it simultaneously treated as its own infinite and uncomplaining dumping ground. Standing on that medieval bridge, looking down at the polluted river, a modern mind inevitably asks a simple, powerful question: how? How could people live like this? How could they endure the constant, overwhelming assault on the senses, the sights, the sounds, and above all, the smells of a world saturated in filth? The answer is as complex as the odorous air they breathed, and it lies in one of the most remarkable and necessary of human traits: adaptation. The key to understanding their acceptance was that for the people who lived there, it wasn't an assault. It was simply reality. It was the sensory baseline of their world, the normal state of affairs. We experienced their world as outsiders, visitors from a sanitized future, and so the shock is acute. But for a person born and raised within the city walls, this was the smell of home. The human sense of smell is incredibly prone to what is known as olfactory fatigue, or sensory adaptation. When constantly exposed to a particular odor, our brains quickly learn to filter it out, to treat it as unimportant background noise. It's why you might notice a strong smell when you first enter a room, but it seems to disappear after a few minutes. For a medieval city dweller, the pervasive background stench of mud, refuse, and smoke was their constant companion from birth. Their noses were tuned to it, and they likely didn't consciously register it most of the time. What they would have noticed were the changes, the new or unusual scents that punctuated the everyday miasma, the sweet, enticing smell of a pie shop, the sharp, medicinal aroma from an apothecary, or the sudden, alarming stench of a particularly rotten piece of waste that signaled a potential source of bad air. This is not to say that they enjoyed the filth or were oblivious to it. They were not. Historical records are filled with complaints about foul odors and attempts to mitigate them. People understood that there was a connection between bad smells and sickness, even if their understanding of the cause was incorrect. Their definition of cleanliness was also relative and practical, not clinical. People took many small measures to create a bubble of relative order and comfort within their own private spaces. A good housewife would be praised for keeping her floors well sanded or for strewing fresh, sweet-smelling herbs like lavender or chamomile over the rushes to mask unpleasant odors. They used scented waters and pomanders to create a more pleasant personal scent bubble when out in public. To cope with the muddy streets, people often wore wooden-soled overshoes called pattens, which elevated their more expensive leather shoes above the worst of the muck. These actions show a clear desire for cleanliness and an aversion to the filth. They were not living in blissful ignorance. Rather, they were employing the best strategies available to them within a system that lacked any large-scale, effective solutions. For the vast majority of people, the simple truth was that there was no alternative. The city, for all its filth and danger, was a place of opportunity. It offered work, community, and the potential for social advancement in a way the rural world often could not. The unpleasantness of the environment was a known and accepted part of the trade-off. They didn't like it, but they endured it, because for them, it was just the way the world was. This acceptance, this deep-seated sensory normalization, shaped the texture of every single day. So now, for our final journey, let's step into that mindset. Let us spend a full day in the life of an ordinary citizen of this city, not as a shocked tourist, but as a resident, experiencing the world through senses that have long since adapted to their environment. Let us feel the rhythm of a day where the extraordinary filth has become completely, utterly ordinary. The day begins not with a jolt, but with a slow awakening to the familiar. The air in your small chamber is cool and smells of wood smoke and old wool. You rise, and your first act is to pull on your sturdy leather shoes, a practical necessity before your feet even touch the floor. You perform your morning ablutions with a small bowl of water, washing your face and hands, creating a small, temporary island of personal freshness. You step out of your house, not into a wall of shocking stench, but simply into the morning air of your city. It is what it is. You walk towards the market, your feet automatically finding the driest path, your body swerving to avoid the kennel without a conscious thought. This is muscle memory, the practiced dance of the urban dweller. The market is a riot of sensory information, but to you, it is just information. The pungent, salty smell of the fishmonger's stall tells you the catch is fresh today. The warm, yeasty aroma spilling from the bakery is a comforting promise of fresh bread. Even the sharp, chemical tang from the tanner's district on the edge of the market is just a signpost, a landmark on your mental map of the city. These are not good or bad smells. They are the smells of commerce, of life, of a city at work. You purchase what you need, your interactions with the vendors brief and familiar. Later in the day, seeking a moment of peace, you might step into the quiet of a churchyard. Here, surrounded by the cool stone of the church and the weathered green of the tombstones, the city's hum and its odors seem to recede. It is not that they disappear entirely, but they are muted, allowing for a moment of quiet contemplation. It is in these small pockets of relative tranquility that you find your respite. As evening approaches, you return home. Your final task of the day is a small ritual of cleansing. You take a knife or a piece of wood and scrape the thick, caked-on mud from the soles and sides of your boots, leaving a small pile of dirt by the doorstep. You wash your hands and face again, rinsing away the grime of the day. This act is not about killing germs. It is about restoring a small sense of personal order, drawing the line between the public chaos of the street and the private sanctuary of your home. As you sit down to your simple evening meal, the day's sensory inputs have been processed, sorted, and filed away. They are the unremarkable backdrop to a life lived, a day survived. And now, that day is over. The walking tour is complete. Let the memory of that medieval city begin to soften and fade. The feeling of the damp, uneven ground beneath your feet, let it dissolve. The pungent, complex smells of the market, the river, the narrow alleyway, let them drift away on a gentle breeze, back into the past where they belong. They are just stories now, echoes in a quiet room. They are not here with you. Here, in your own time, in your own bed, the air is clean and still. Feel the simple, profound comfort of your own smooth sheets, the gentle weight of your own clean blanket. There are no dangers lurking in the air, no refuse to dodge in the darkness. There is only the deep, quiet peace of your own safe space. Let your body grow heavy, releasing the last remnants of that long ago world. Let go of the need to be vigilant, the need to watch your step. There is nowhere else you need to be. Allow your mind to become as still and as clear as the air you are breathing. Take a slow, deep breath in, feeling the calm, and as you breathe out, release all thoughts of the day, all stories of the past. There is only this moment, this quiet, this gentle pull into a deep and truly peaceful sleep. Good night.